Welcome to our webinar. We're going to cover the ESG reporting trends of the top 100 food and beverage companies in the US and Canada today. We're going to talk just briefly about SGS, but talk about within the research that we've conducted on the 100 food and bev companies reporting, whether they report or not, in the common framework, standards and agencies they use, governance bodies and board level approaches to ESG and sustainability, environmental topics and targets, social topics and targets, third-party assurance and levels of which they choose to get assured. And then we'll give you an overview, kind of the summary of the food and bev leadership practices that we found based on the research. We will probably have with us Mohit McLaren, our national sales manager, who does pharma, cosmetics, personal care, but also food sales in Canada. It has a long background in multiple certifications in multiple industries, but he is dealing with some technical difficulties. His power went out, and so he's wished he was here today. If he hops back on, we might see him. Myself, Adam Hammis, I'm the ESG director for North America, and my team runs sustainability assurance and training for the region. And Harsh Vasoya will be here as well, lead assurer for ESG and sustainability, and has a long history in the industry of working, came from KPMG, but has over, I think now 9+ years of experience across multiple sectors, and done several thought leadership pieces as well. Just to know that you can ask us a lot of questions, and Mohit will probably be on later as our food expert, but we have done assurance and greenhouse gas verifications across food industries as well. So myself and Harsh can take those questions. Just briefly, if you hadn't heard of SGS, we are the world's leading inspection, verification, testing, and certification company. We have a very large footprint around the globe. That includes food and bev, and so we have a lot of compliance and certification services, including food safety, advisory, packaging, storage and distribution. We have agents and brokers. We do second-party audits and traceability. We have food testing labs all over the world. We focus on animal feed and animal welfare, RSPO, MSC. We'll do testing for allergens, gluten-free, non-GMO, FSMA, and we'll also do addendums for major retailers. So we're steeped in the food and bev industry from a services side, and then what we'll talk about today on the reporting side is where the Sustainability Assurance Division focuses. And so we have a lot of expertise to pull from across the company, and sustainability has not new for SGS. It's been embedded in the company from the top to bottom for a very long time as a core principle. We have been involved in a lot of the standard writing processes and working groups, and becoming verifying bodies for the standards once they become available. And we get recognized for our leadership in these industries by all the rating agencies. If you look across, we're very proud of that. And one of the things is just to show that we are in the same boat as many of our clients, and we're doing a lot of the same reporting standards that you are. With that said, I'm going to hand this to Harsh Vasoya to talk about just the research that we conducted and a little bit of the background of what kind of information we're showing you today.
Sure. Thank you, Adam, and hello, everyone. So today we are going to talk about the top 100 food and beverage company as a series of our thought leaderships that we are creating as a sectorial, specific thought leaderships. And when we talk about specifically from the top 100 food and beverage companies, we have specifically taken the list from ZoomInfo Enhanced Research for companies who are operating in Canada and US, and the source information is as projected on the screen. All these companies, when we have selected, were representation of, from by the revenue in the US and Canada operations. And we more than happy to share all the insights that we have gathered on the ESG thought leaderships.
And Harsh, remind me, should I take this one?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Without Mohit, I'm now just a little flustered. So we wanted to check in with everybody. Everything that we share is fantastic information. It's really great to know and understand the industry and what your peers are doing. But it's also, we'll reiterate time and time again, you really need to know where your program is, what level of maturity, where you're at in your process, and what is right for you. And so some of the things to consider as, have you published an annual ESG or sustainability report? Yes, no, possibly, I don't know. For SGS, I would answer yes, and I just did. Give everyone a chance, but really it's a threshold to understand, or a milestone to say that you are you have put in the work, it sometimes can take 1 or 2 years that first time to really collect the data, to do a materiality assessment, perhaps to understand what you're going to include and exclude, what kind of data and KPIs you're going to use. It's a substantial amount of effort. For anyone who has done it knows, and it doesn't mean that you're doing good or bad. It just means that you might be further along and more mature, having gone through that process, and it really helps to know where you're at. So if you have yes, no, I'll give you a few more seconds. Like I said, SGS has been publishing an ESG and sustainability report for about a decade or more. We're one of the first in our industry. I think we were the first in our industry, in the TIC industry, testing, inspection, and certification, to have an integrated report, which is financials right alongside non-financial data. So looking at today, the majority of us do report. There's about 31% no, and some I don't know. You're all in good company. Just it's really good to take a pulse on where you're at in your efforts. So before we jump in, we're talking about ESG and sustainability reports. There's kind of two things to differentiate, not that it's critical, but when we talk about today, if you hear us saying ESG or sustainability, they're very related terms, but we're using them in their technical definitions. So ESG, despite what you may have heard, it purely means, and it's from the public sector, it's environmental, social, and governance, and it's just financially material topics in those three categories: environmental, social, or governance. It's simply a place to look for financially material topics that do impact the business. It's if there are social environmental issues, it's are they impacting your business? When you talk about, and you could add this in, sustainability, often you're talking about impact materiality, which is both, that's not both, the profit sectors looking at from the business, are you and your operations impacting people on the planet? Often associated with negative, but it's definitely positives as well. But double materiality is when you have both. You're talking about the financial materiality for the business and what is your impact as a business on people on the planet. That is often called double materiality out of GRI, and CSRD has that baked in coming out of Europe. But ESG is very fundamentally just what is the financial material topics to your business, and that is what we're going to focus on today. And when you look at standards, they can also be very clearly delineated between the two. That most of the standards that are getting the most traction right now from the investor community are all financial materiality driven. Integrated reporting, SASB, TCFD, all combined, and then were absorbed into IFRS or the ISSB group. And the IFRS S1 and S2 standards that came out last year are a culmination of all that work. And they're very much financial material topics and KPIs, where sustainability and impact materiality, GRI, and the UN SDGs are very much outwardly focused about public good, what's good for the planet, what's good for society. And so that's often what we'll make sure we delineate between. And I'll turn it over to Harsh to see what we saw.
Thanks, Adam. And I'll continue the discussion where Adam just mentioned about so many frameworks and standards, where we are at a point where all the different regions, countries, states are coming up with regulations to promote more and more ESG and sustainability disclosures, and they are motivating companies to come forward and disclose the information. And considering the fact that now we are in a turning point, but what we observed in the food and bev sector, that 91% of the companies are already reporting on their ESG and sustainability reporting through their website, dedicated website, or they are using a sustainability report as a platform to disclose the information to their stakeholders. And when they are doing that, there are still companies, some companies who are trying to capture that journey and be part of that larger group, who are communicating all their performance, all the initiatives, targets, goals to their all the different relevant stakeholders. But at the same time, when we talk about what kind of frameworks or standards that they are using, we observe that many of the companies are still using SDG as and which is at a national level, and the entire world is working around towards the global goal. They are using that as one of their key drivers to communicate their story and the efforts that they are doing to contribute to the global goals. And to the companies who are matured in reporting, like they have 5, 6, 7 reports, they have reached a level where they're using multiple frameworks. So that was also something that we observed, and which was very often combined, like GRI, TCFD, CDP, SASB reports. they have used this multiple standards and frameworks in conjunction to disclose their information, where they are having their mortality spread across the different frameworks. They have brought about alliance, and they have tried to disclose the information as much as possible using all these frameworks, because all the different frameworks are targeting different audience or targeting different stakeholders, and they have tried to capture as many stakeholders as they can using this frameworks in conjunction to each other. So that is what something that we have observed, but still, considering the amount of companies who have reported, which is 91%. Still, many of the companies are having, using their information in a very ad hoc, or in much of, I would say, free information on their website, which is talking about their initiatives in loose without any reference to any framework or standards, which is somewhere around 40 to 50% of the companies are only using frameworks.
And I'd throw out there, I think some of the surprises from people might see, but SDG and GRI are the highest. But it might not surprise you. You're food and bev, and so you're delivering consumer goods that they're putting in their body. So a lot of the pressure uniquely on food and bev industry is coming from the public good, and individuals wanting to have healthy food. And GRI and the SDGs are a good fit for those public-facing types of reporting and the kind of questions or maybe concerns you're getting from the marketplace.
Yes, and just one more point I would like to add before we move in, that all the different statistics that we'll be seeing from this point would be basis 91% companies who are reporting towards sustainability or ESG on their website or report. We'll be considering that as a basis and looking at the analysis going forward in the coming slides.
All right, next question. Has your organization established a senior level governance body for ESG and sustainability? You might call it an ESG senior committee or a sustainability committee. This is when you talk about the E and the S and the G as just being categories, governance is often the #1 issue by standards, frameworks, rating agencies. They want to know not necessarily how your performance is, but do you have a senior level governance committee looking at the risks, identifying the opportunities, and then managing them appropriately, more so, and at least prior to then they go look at your KPIs and your performance over time. And so governance almost always is the first and most highest weighted issue and prioritized among investors, banks, stakeholders, things like that. I'll put yes for SGS, for instance, because we have a senior level with board oversight committee that's been working on this. Obviously, we're a global company, so we have a lot of regulatory schemes by region even that we have to adhere to, and many of you might be in that same setting. But no, yes, or I don't know. I'll give you a few more moments to think about it, but essentially it's a committee that meets regularly, at least probably twice a year, if not more. That does consider things like environmental, social, and governance, your material sustainability topics. If you conducted a materiality assessment, for instance, the results of that are usually delivered to this senior committee for their, to inform them so that they can create a strategy that takes that into account. And so those are just some of the ways to think about it. If you don't know, that's totally fine. I'll give you 3 more seconds. 1, 2, 3. And again, a high level of acumen here on this call. So just yes, 61.5%, great. No, you're also in good company. Some folks do miss the governance piece. They jump right into the activity, but we highly recommend checking out governance. And there's a reason why it's a priority from all these stakeholders, is because it's an essential component. And then I don't know, great to check out. A lot of companies would report their governance committee in the report itself. And so possibly if they're not reporting it, you could consider that might be evidence they don't have one in their company, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. You could ask. When we talk about governance, this is where this conversation comes from. There's maturity as you go through this cycle of ESG or sustainability within the company. These first 3 steps, awareness, setting priorities, strategy, they are where the governance happens. Execution comes next and reporting after that, but that's really set by a senior committee. If it's not, you have to ask yourself, Why not? And are other individuals besides senior representatives in the company capable of setting a company-wide strategy and determining what is material to the business? Our answer would typically be no, and it needs to be these kind of folks that set that. And then they often have direct oversight from the board. And here's just an example. We've scrubbed the names, but this is directly from a report that shows the executive board, the sustainability steering committee, but a multiple component. You can see all the different sectors and divisions of the company are represented. And then there's an actual sustainability department that focuses on those things as well. So multiple levels and frameworks that can be done, but this is one good example from a large food company. And I'll turn it over to Harsh.
Thank you, Adam. And as we just Adam explained that the senior management roles play a very, very vital role in framing your sustainability journey and communicating the right message, which is also driven by your highest governance body in your organization. And when we did the analysis of all the different companies, and again, the basis is 91% companies who reported on the sustainability, we observed that 68% have a senior committee who is looking over to their performance on a regular basis, who have meetings either on a monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, or 6-monthly meetings before it goes to the board oversight. And this specific senior committee members are highlighted in different committees that they have defined as not necessarily as ESG committee, but also as part of their internal audit committee, risk management committee, or even stakeholder committee, where the objective is that the management people of different or the group heads come together, discuss about the challenges and opportunities in the regular operations, and how they can communicate that and escalate that to the senior management. And out of all those companies who are reporting, we observe that many companies have ESG senior committee, but not everybody has a board oversight attached to it, which means that the committees are also still taking the decision and driving sustainability. Although many of the companies, I would say a large number of companies, that is 60%, have reached out to their board for confirmation, for communication, and more insights to drive sustainability, because it's an top-down approach, which is the best approach to drive in an organization to achieve a great height. But again, at the same time, we observe that not all have, who have committee are committed towards going towards their board to communicate their story, or to get the confirmation or compliance check on their operations, to have a consistency and accuracy check on an annual basis or a 6-monthly basis.
All right. Thank you, Harsh. And the next question for everyone, what are your organization's top 3 environmental topics? If you have selected them, if you know what they are, this is a list from the food and bev industry specifically. And if you have another, absolutely, we'd love to hear about it in the Q&A section. But I can tell you, from SGS, climate emissions for us, and really we have energy management as a part of our climate initiative, but we're largely, if you look at our testing labs, I guess, but we just ship a lot of people around the world. We have auditors, inspectors. So we exist as a company that is flying individuals with laptops and little devices all over the world. So we have a lot less like water management and waste management issues that rise to the top. But I think if I were to pick a third, which is a distant third, it would probably still be something related to our buildings, and it might be maybe waste management. I know that they're all probably come in a distant third to the amount of flights and trains and car rides and everything else that we take. So that's how we kind of look at our environmental topics, just because of who we are, and you would look at them differently. I'll give you a few more seconds so that people can still submit. And see what these results are. So a large balance. It's good to see that we have some consistency. Biodiversity didn't come up that much, which is a little interesting, but I understand that it could be in other categories as well. Sometimes it's in like waste, and it's more of like pollution control, but energy management came out first, followed by greenhouse gas, climate emissions, waste and materials, or really dead heat, followed by water and materials, which makes sense, and then waste and packaging. No others, but again, it's good to know what your 3 topics are. We're going to show you next what the industry showed. But we also wanted to ask a very specific question, which is important. Have you set any environmental targets? And whether those are internal or external, but if you identified 3 areas, having a KPI and then setting a target is essential to making improvements, if that's part of your goal. And so that's really critical, and we're going to look at that next as well. What's the target setting kind of appetite for the food and bev industry, 100 companies? We have set some very public, I'll click on yes, very public goals under environmental, greenhouse gas for sure, but energy internally, we have energy goals to reduce our footprint in electricity usage across all of our buildings. We've set up science-based targets to meet the Paris level reductions for greenhouse gas emissions. And if you check out our integrated report, there's quite a few. So I'll give everyone a few more moments, but setting targets does become an essential component of a strategy. With the growing sense of greenwashing and actual legislation coming out in places like Europe and expanding and growing beyond that, there's actually a lot of lawsuits coming out to say if you're misrepresenting your claims around sustainability, that it's actually false advertising and you can be penalized for it. So setting targets is one way to insulate yourself from greenwashing and say, no, we're measuring it, we intend to get to this target, and therefore we're allowed to make claims about the efforts that we're putting in. So again, great, that's great, it's great news. 71.4% have yes. Folks that have no and I don't know, there are still folks out there, so you're not in bad company, but we just recommend thinking about that because the target setting process is essential for multiple reasons. And now I'll turn it back to Har. Oh, no, I won't. Sorry. These are just some examples. So if you look at environmental topics and targets in this conversation, when we look at the food and bev industry, there are some kind of frameworks and reporting platforms that come up and we saw more often in the industry, but then there are some target setting guidance specifically. I mentioned science-based targets, but the specific UN SDGs that are relevant, the Alliance for Water Stewardship, the How to Recycle Program, World Benchmarking Alliance, you can find both frameworks and platforms on which to report, but also guidance on how to set targets and how aggressive to make those targets and what is industry best practice for those targets. So this is just a sampling of what you might see.
Thanks, Adam. And when we have so much of reporting frameworks and target setting platforms where we can take a reference from, the observation that we had from the top 100 companies on environmental KPI specifically is that out of 91% companies who are reporting on ESG and sustainability, 80% of them are taking specific environmental KPIs to report on their performance, on their targets. And the most common topics that we observed, which was packaging and material sourcing, where we were not surprised considering the food and beverage sector. And the most common targets that were taken were towards emission, water, and waste, which also we saw in the poll that was one which were chosen as the highest amount of targets that people have taken currently on call. The surprising part was that many of the companies who are reporting on the different environmental KPIs are taking their initiatives, taking their upstream, downstream activities, and reporting on various activities that they are performing towards packaging, towards material sourcing, their engagement with their suppliers, how they are making their initiatives, environmental initiatives like solar panel installations, or even how they are taking water initiatives, and collaborating with different group of stakeholders to make sure that the environmental KPI targets that they have are communicated to all the different stakeholder groups. One of the areas that we did not see much of the traction was towards biodiversity conservation. But again, that was something that many companies have reported as an initiative and not have taken specific targets towards the same. And when we see the balance of all the environmental KPIs that companies have reported on, we saw that all the different companies are reporting on all the initiatives towards various environmental KPIs, and we have selected this one which were most commonly reported. But yes, there were many more KPIs that companies where they don't find any specific relevance to, or they don't find exact nomenclature to their standards and frameworks, they have reported and identified as a company defined to a environmental KPI and as well reported them as well. So that is where we have seen environmental KPIs taking a lot of traction in the food and bev industry.
And I'll say we've done this exercise and this research in multiple industries, and this is the most balanced we've seen. The food and bev industry has a lot of KPIs with kind of equal amount of reporting. You'll see other industries where they have a few that are really stand out, and it's more of a Pareto chart. This is a very balanced chart compared to some other industries. So that our hat is off to you. Being in the food and bev industry, there's a lot of demands on a lot of different topics, and they're fairly equal in being represented, whereas other industries kind of have heavy on a couple of KPIs.
Right. And Adam, so sorry, I'll just add one more point because I think the slide got chopped off from side. The dark solid color, white color is the KPI reported, or the number of KPIs that people have reported, and the striped bar is the number of targets that companies have taken.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense that packaging and material sourcing is a big issue. Most companies do find it difficult, not impossible, but it is harder to set targets. Where emissions, water, and waste, they're pretty straightforward. They have units of measure, and it's just easier to set targets in those areas. Whereas packaging, it is not always 100% clear what should we be achieving in packaging, what's good and what's not good. But they're still not far off. Let's go to social topics. So these, again, pulling directly from the food and bev industry. What are your top 3 for your industry or for your company? And that's what's important. We say it's great, this information and the insights from what the industry is doing, but ultimately you do need to decide what is material to your business. And so we have, I'll just talk through it from us. Training and education is huge for us as SGS because, again, we're just a lot of individuals traveling around the world doing audits, inspections, and assurance. Human rights, less. Occupational health and safety, yes, from all of our travel. And data privacy for our clients is massive because we handle a lot of confidential information. But for you, again, we're not in the food and bev specifically or a business services company, but what would your top 3 be? And again, it's really to level set and say, where do you spend your time? Especially if you're early on in the reporting process, you can mature over time, but best not to adopt 20 material topics. Maybe you want to do your top 7, roughly, 5 to 10, but it's a lot of work at first until you get the program established, and then you can grow and mature and add more if that works for you. So I'll give everyone a moment more to type in. Again, if you have an other, and Justine, thanks for asking, what's the stripe bar? Harsh answered that question. And we'll take a look. So again, less balance here on the social, where we got some that really stand out. Health and safety, very important. Product health and safety, very important for food. Human rights, often in the supply chain, depending on how big your supply chain is going to become more and more important. Diversity in the workplace, data privacy, product health and nutrition. So you've got lots of examples here, and we've got an other. So I encourage whoever did other, we'd love to hear about it in the Q&A box. But again, it makes sense. And when you break that down, you look at your industry, it doesn't surprise us to see that workers and worker health is very critical. So have you set, again, same thing for environmental, but has your organization set social targets or targets related to your social material topics? Yes, again, we have that from SGS. You could do no, I don't know, but sometimes, again, they could be internal targets as long as you're measuring them. But if they're publicly facing, that's what we're going to look at today. But a lot of the times there is some insurance or risk avoidance where you might set an internal target, work on it for a year before you're comfortable telling the world. And that is, so for you is just, do you have them? And that's a best practice to make sure that you're defining your program. And it's also defensible if anybody comes and says, hey, we don't think what you're claiming about your program is true from a greenwashing standpoint. So I'll give you a few more moments and then we'll let everybody see if you have time. All right. Yes, a little less on this one. And I'll say this, people are always harder to measure than widgets. Environmental is usually very like you're measuring stuff. And when you're measuring people, it's just naturally and inherently not as easy. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but just that's the way the world works. So 60% yes is still very good. Everyone, if you're a no, still in good company, and we'll see how everyone else is doing. But we encourage you it's still worth striving for those targets and trying to define success and what is good. And I'll go next. Well, Justine says social other targets we have fall into our community: product donations, financial donations, and volunteer days. That's fantastic. Thank you. And those are definitely common. Here are some of the same things. Some of the platforms are similar, and then other guidance on actual targets and how to set targets in specific areas, in specific social areas. So we have the UN Global Compact, GFSI, ILO, BRC, the different ISO standards for 45,000, 27,000, WSIB Ontario, and the UN SDG goals. Again, no matter, you would first want to determine your material topics, but often once you determine a topic, you can find a standard or a guidance specific to how to set a target in that material topic. Harsh?
Thanks, Adam. And considering the social KPI, we observed what companies are reporting on the environmental KPIs, and they're great on reporting on initiatives and taking targets. And similar trend we observed in social KPI, but little less traction on the social KPI and targets, where we saw 79% of the companies are reporting on social KPIs through their either website or their reports. And the most common topic that we observed reported was the product health and nutrition and product health and safety. Considering the sector, that made complete sense to us that all their product and services are directly getting impacted to your stakeholder, that is the end user customer. And this topics has to be upmost topics that has to be taken all the initiative towards across the process, sourcing, upstream, downstream, all the activities. But the difference I would say where we saw and traction was on towards the target towards occupational health and safety and diversity and equal opportunity and inclusivity. The targets that we thought would be much more active were again thought that product health and safety and nutrition would be somewhat we would see, but again, considering the OHS that we observed, the trend and read through the trends that companies are reporting on, all the initiatives that they have taken in OHS are across the process, across their stakeholders, how they can make the entire operation safe for their operation hygiene, as well as have much more diversity in the operations. So that were some of the topics that companies have reported. Where we did not see much of a traction was, again, training and education was something that people have highly reported on, but the targets or specific numbers that people have not quantified. But again, they have reported a lot of initiatives, how they are trying to upskill their employees, upskill their supplier group, and at the same time having initiatives that they have identified to make sure that entire value chain is benefited from all the different initiatives that they are taking.
And I'm trying to think of anything to add, which I probably don't need to, but just in case people like product health and safety, product health and nutrition. Nutrition is usually focused on just positive outcomes, whereas product health and safety is, recalls, stopping negative outcomes and avoiding recalls and things like that. They can and are often talked about together, but one is a huge kind of booming industry, which is the health and nutrition piece. And are you offering healthy versions or alternatives to foods? Does your organization, the next stage, seek third-party assurance for ESG and sustainability data? Yes, no, or I don't know. We'll talk about it soon, but just the growing demand is that, especially if the larger you are, if you're publicly traded, if you're under any regulatory schemes, you're starting to see, if they don't already exist, then they're being stair-stepped in and say they will be requiring assurance in the next year or 3 years or all the different schemes have kind of their own timeline, but the majority, what we're seeing is assurance is starting to be in that same conversation where it used to just be reporting. Now it's here's where assurance is required. So we, being an assurance company, which is very common in our industry, actually have a competitor, and we can't assure our own stuff. And so we go out and have a competitor do it for us. And we have assured our data for quite some time. But it is sort of an advanced stage where you have to conduct a materiality assessment, put together all the data collection, report something, and then decide if you want to have it third-party assured. So we understand if it's a no, but you might also not know. One way to know is when you look in somebody's report. Often you paid good money and spent good time to get that assurance, so you often notate it, some visual check mark, or there will be a paragraph describing your process, or which we'll show you next, you'll actually publish the statement that you get from the third-party assurance provider. So we'll take one more moment in case anybody wants to go last minute and show the results. A balance here, a lot of yeses, but more nos on third-party assurance, and some I don't know. So again, just if you want to look for that, you would probably find visual or written documentation in the sustainability or ESG report, because people don't like to make that effort without getting recognized for it. This is an example of an SGS statement. We have different components, but it clarifies exactly what's being assured, the standards they're using, the scope of the engagement, and our opinion. So there's essentially a positive or negative opinion. That doesn't mean accurate or not. If we issue a statement, we'll tell you next, it can be of 2 levels of assurance. But we try to make them look nice because they do get published in public reports. So if you think about assurance and you're not familiar with it, a good just summary is, if you're going to set strategy, if you're early on, you're going to get training, you might do a materiality assessment, you're going to get consulting when you're executing. But when you get into reporting, you may do something like a pre-assurance where you don't need a statement, but you do want to check your systems, your data collection, your definitions of your KPIs. That is a sort of a smaller engagement that is easier, faster, and cheaper to do. But once you get into full assurance, there's really 2 options or 4 options of varying degrees. Limited assurance, it's much like a CPA firm. It's exactly like a CPA firm would do. And reasonable assurance is more robust. Now, you can do just KPIs, which is pretty popular here in the United States and Canada. In Europe, full report assurance is much more common, and it's growing around the world. But KPIs are, you just select, we've had as little as 2 KPIs. We've had, I think, as high as 25. But it's ad hoc. You choose which KPIs you want to be assured. Or you say the full report has to be compliant with GRI or SASB. Those are 2 of the most common. TCFD is specifically with climate risks, but those are 2 different versions. The full report has more context, more cost, because you're looking at the whole process, even how you selected the KPIs to include and the material topics. And that is a very key difference. But when you look at limited versus reasonable, limited means there's a moderate level of sampling and it's a negative opinion, which is just listed as we did not find evidence to suggest that these claims are not true. And it's not as rigorous, doesn't hold as much weight with stakeholders, but it is very common. It's definitely a good starting place. And then reasonable level of assurance, which is required for financial data, is you're often looking at high levels of sampling and positive opinions where we say, this is, we have found evidence to believe that these claims are true. And then again, the full report assurance is just that extra step where you're looking at the full context of the report. Is it SASB compliant, GRI, or TCFD compliant? And that can be limited and reasonable as well. And so the tangible benefits, why do people do it? The overlooked piece that I think people should really focus on is the internal confidence in your own investments and strategies, because this data is being used to spend money within the company, to invest, and you really want to believe in the math and the systems that you put in place to make those decisions. And then also, obviously, external confidence for your customers and stakeholders. Assurance improves your sustainability ratings and scores in every situation, and also is required to meet and exceed sometimes regulatory requirements. And so that's why people do it. And handing it over to Harsh.
Right. Thanks, Adam. And rightly as Adam said that the assurance, even though it's people say that it's last part of your activity before it again goes in the loop, and it starts with the awareness, training, strategy building, reporting exercise, which is a massive exercise, and after that comes the assurance, and something that we observed in the food and bev sector is that many companies are still not taking the assurance as the last step to embark on, and there could be multiple reasons why this is happening, where 28% only 28% companies are taking reporting reports to their assurance to third party, and the reasons could be that they are still maturing on their information. They want to structure it and have those specific, third-party assurance taken after that, or it could be that they are only having internal assurance done to the internal audit team. But again, when it comes to their external stakeholders or investor groups or regulators, nowadays there are many tractions that are seeking third-party assured reports, and that's where we are seeing more and more increasing trends where limited companies who have a limited level of assurance, where companies have taken 96% of assurance type. But again, we observe that many of the companies who have taken limited assurance are also have taken full report assurance, which was 11%. And when you take this kind of an activity of full report assurance, which only represents that all the different KPIs that you have been working on, all the different data processes that you have been working on, have reached to a maturity level where you can, comfortably take and third party to all your KPIs, all your targets, and the performance that you have undertaken, and take and report to a limited assurance. And the average number of KPIs that we have observed was 8.2 KPIs, and don't get confused with the decimal. What we have considered right now is all the companies who are taking assurance. How many is the average number of KPIs people have taken into consideration? That would be ranging from 5 to 15. But yes, many companies have taken a good amount of KPIs, which again represents that much and more and more maturity in your operations, in your data collection process, and the data management, which can be verified for their accuracy in completeness before it goes in the public domain. The reasonable assurance, the percentage are very low currently, and again, as Adam said, that it's a very rigorous process. It requires much more evidence, and the value created after the reasonable assurance is much higher, and it requires that much of rigorous movement as well from both the parties, and that's where we are seeing that the numbers are low, but still many companies are looking at taking reasonable assurance as an activity once the entire assurance process is complete, so the reporting process is completed. The outcome of this entire exercise of assurance, really helps the companies to again before going into the next year, to take all the feedback of how they have reached to a level where they can have much more improvement in their process, policies, SOPs, and data collection, which can again go towards the same process of having their awareness, training, strategy, and updating their reporting process. So we have seen that many companies undertake in the limited assurance capacity. But yes, we were seeing much more trend which are going towards full report or reasonable report as well.
And one scenario that we like to throw out there to why we suggest and want assurance to be done earlier in the process. If you can imagine, this happens. Some companies want to wait, it's not required, but if you start collecting 5, 6, 7 years worth of data and showing it publicly year over year, and you've not gotten that assured, and then suddenly you want to get the 8th year assured, you might find the findings might be high, and you have to go back and change a bunch of the way you calculated the data, the collection. Your numbers then get changed dramatically, and it casts doubt on 7 years of data. And then you would have to go back and try to normalize that for the changes that need to be made. That's a situation we don't hope to find anybody in. But the reality is, yes, maybe waiting the first year till you're ready, but the longer you wait, the higher the risk is that once it's assured, you'll have to go back and fix significant amounts of data. Otherwise, you're going to report it, and it's not going to be trusted, and people won't understand the seismic shift that happened in this later year. You'll have to have a bunch of footnotes in your reports. And so that's one of the things, the scenarios that we want people to avoid. And so just we share it for a reason, because we care. With next steps, just looking at leadership practices. So based on what we saw, and Harsh did, my hat is off to him, looking at all these 100 companies, conducting this research, that if you want to look at what are leadership practices and where can you start, is that establishing a senior governance committee is great. You really need to prioritize and manage your material ESG topics. Ideally, it would be with board oversight, just because that's the highest value for the company long term. Do measure and disclose performance per material topic in an annual report. Once you get into that annual cycle, it's the best. Websites are a great kind of jumping off point, but a full report is much more effective. Aligning to relevant international reporting frameworks and standards. As we showed in the industry, the ones that are being used the most are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Reporting Initiative, TCFD. CDP is really a climate reporting disclosure platform, and then SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Boards. And if you look, SASB is included, but it's really like IFRS S1 and S2, or ISSB S1 and S2 are sort of the new updated versions of those. And then for considering environmental topics, what are your KPIs and targets? At least look at the top 4 that we saw: packaging, material sourcing, greenhouse gas emissions, and energy management. Also, social topics. Are you considering KPIs and targets for product health and nutrition, product health and safety, occupational health and safety, and human rights? And consider at least a limited assurance for those minimum number of critical KPIs. If you looked at those top 8 and you only decided to do 5 or 6, consider that limited assurance would really help in developing a program that's going to be successful long term and give you the internal confidence you need to move forward in the program. Just so you know, a little bit of weird stuff, but if you look at the top, what we can help you with, if you ever need services, sustainability and ESG, and sustainability and greenhouse gas, GHG, mirror each other. So we have everything from the beginning of your journey till the end. We have SGS Academy with tons of training. We conduct materiality assessments. We don't do a lot of execution in the ESG sustainability space because we're not a consulting firm, but we do a lot of greenhouse gas accounting, CDP advisory, SBTI advisory, and then we have pre-assurance offers when you're just starting out to report, and we have full assurance and KPI assurance and sustainability report assurance, both at the limited and reasonable level. That's really our bread and butter and who we are as a company, and we can help you at any stage of that journey that you're in. This is just a look at a deep dive of some of our academy courses, where we have kind of, again, mirroring each other. We have some e-learnings in ESG, but we have courses for every sustainability or greenhouse gas standard, all the ISO standards, all the way up to becoming a verifier if you'd like, which you can work for us. And then we have focuses on different roles within the company, a leadership course for strategy, ESG execution, ESG reporting. And we have 2 new technical workshops that are really popular. One is Boost Your CDP Climate Score, and one is Boost Your EcoVadis Score. And that actually EcoVadis workshop is coming up on April 11th. If you're interested. And we have a huge library and growing all the time, literally about 100 hours and 100 videos of webinars, recordings, live events, facility tours, training sessions, all on our YouTube channel, which is SGS North America. And we continue to upload stuff, I think, weekly. So anything you're looking for, you can find it there for free. And we invite you to subscribe and keep following us. And we have a ton of time, 10 minutes left for Q&A. And if you have questions, you can reach Mohit, myself, and Harsh after this as well. But any questions you can put in the Q&A box. Happy to go back to other slides and answer any questions you have. Nobody right off the bat. One question that comes up a lot is the SEC ruling just came out on greenhouse gas. First off, we usually say that greenhouse gas, if you're going to start with KPIs, climate change and greenhouse gas is a great place to start. If you want to dip your toe in the water and just do one, it's quite a bit of work, but it is the #1 regulated issue or a material topic around the globe. And if you want to start with something like TCFD or the IFRS S1 and S2 standards, risk assessment is the first thing, just like governance for all of ESG, but governance for climate change is TCFD or the IFRS S2 standard. And that is just assessing your risk. That's the best place to start. That's how the SEC rulings are also scheduled. The stair step is if you're a smaller company, you start with risk, and the bigger companies have to go faster, but then you add in actually reporting your emissions. And so that's always going to be the number one. It's going to increase. The number of regulatory schemes will keep increasing. It hasn't slowed down. And the SEC ruling does have an assurance timeline that's pretty slow compared to what it was initially when it was published. I think it's a 2029 is when assurance is going to kick in. But again, I said waiting until it's mandatory is not always the best scheme. So at least starting with a pre-assurance might be wise if you know that in the next few years you're going to be required to have full assurance. But the SEC ruling is always top of mind with everyone. And greenhouse gas itself is more regulated than, especially in the US and Canada, than ESG and sustainability itself. CSRD is European, that's having an impact over here. IFRS S1 and S2 is having an impact in Canada, but in the US, it's mostly greenhouse gas, specifically regulations on risk and disclosures.
And also now, soon we'll be seeing Canadian regulation as well, CSDS, coming up, which is up for consultation. And with that, also the assurance uptake definitely would be going up because of the regulations that are demanding for it. It's just that the decision is still pending on how much of grace period should be given to the early adopters of reporters who are embarking on the journey. And when talking about this assurance process and the statistics that we observe, that many companies are still trying to embark on the journey of assurance. One of the activity that we undergone with one of our clients was they had just embarked on their journey of sustainability and were really confused about how to start with their assurance process. And the best approach that they took was, they had 13-15 KPIs that they were reporting on. But for year one, they just chose to have an internal report of the entire assurance process, where the entire process was followed as is to the book. And in the end, when the approach was that we will be issuing an internal report to check how much of their processes are up to date and how much disclosure can be made in the next year. But there came a point where they were much more ready with 2 KPIs, and then they started their entire assurance journey from the very first year to have an assurance on 2 KPIs versus where they were reporting on 13. And then in year 2, they increased the scope towards multiple KPIs while working around those KPIs around the year. So, when you have that kind of an internal assessment done by a third party, definitely it gives much more confidence in your process as well, how you are taking multiple initiatives, what are the controls established, and what are the checks and balances that you have in place, which really helps you to improve in your data capturing, data alliance, as well as reporting at the final end before it comes to the assurance statement.
Well, I don't see any questions in the Q&A box. We do have a few more minutes. We're happy to stay on. But if you do have a question, we can answer anything. Mohit is also back and is our food expert, so we can dive into any questions with him. But if we don't see any, we can tell everyone thank you. All right. Well, we want to thank everyone. I know that everyone's busy. Thank you for coming here today. Thank you for your questions along the way. Justine, you had some really good ones, and hopefully we covered everything you wanted to hear. But if you have more questions, the recording will come out soon. Also, we have a ton of other information on the food and bev industry as well on our YouTube channel. So go check us out and reach out if you have any further updates. Thank you to Harsh and Mohit and Mona for being on today. And I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.